My mother abandoned me as a baby and chose to be a mom to her other 3 kids. Now her husband demands to walk me down the aisle. But when he showed up at my house, I slammed the door, and what I screamed left them speechless. I'm 27 years old. I'm engaged to the love of my life. And about 2 weeks ago, I had to slam the door in the face of a guy who's basically a stranger, but insists he should walk me down the aisle at my wedding. I know how that sounds, like completely unhinged, but the thing is way more complicated than that, and I need to tell it because I'm still processing everything that happened. I guess I should start at the beginning. When I was a baby. My mom, Jennifer, had me when she was like 22 years old, and according to what my dad Robert told me later, she basically disappeared when I was about 6 months old. It wasn't a dramatic thing where she left in the middle of the night or anything like that. She just one day told my dad that she wasn't ready to be a mother, that this wasn't what she wanted, and she left. Just like that. My dad tried to make things work, asked her to try, to go to therapy, whatever, but she'd already made her decision. They ended up in court because my dad needed to formalize custody and all that, and the judge ordered Jennifer to have visitation and pay child support. Spoiler alert, neither of those two things happened consistently. My dad raised me alone. And when I say alone, I mean completely alone. He worked double shifts as a manager at an auto parts store to be able to pay for everything. Took me to daycare before his shift, picked me up after, made me food well. He tried. He wasn't the best cook, but he made an effort. Helped me with homework, read me bedtime stories, everything. He was my dad and my mom at the same time, you know? And never, not once, did he make me feel like I was a burden, or that his life would have been better without me. Quite the opposite. He always told me I was the best thing that ever happened to him, that I was his purpose in life. Jennifer, on the other hand, was like a ghost. The visits the judge had ordered were every other weekend, but she'd show up like once every 2 or 3 months, if that. And when she came, it was super awkward because it was obvious she didn't know what to do with me. She'd take me to the park and spend the whole time on her phone, or buy me an ice cream, and then return me to my dad 2 hours early because she had things to do. Child support was another issue. The truth is, she almost never paid. My dad had to take her to court like 3 times, and she ended up going to jail twice for not paying. Twice. Can you believe it? And even then, she still didn't pay consistently. My dad eventually gave up pursuing her legally because it was costing him more in lawyers than what she owed him. When I was like 6 years old, Jennifer met Paul. They got married super fast, like 6 months after getting together, and they started having kids almost immediately. They had 3 in total, all back to back. Suddenly, Jennifer could be a mother. You know what I mean? She could have a family, take her kids to school, do all that perfect mom stuff, but not with me. With me, she'd been too young, wasn't ready, it wasn't the right time, blah, blah, blah. But with the kids she had with Paul, everything was different. That hurt me a lot when I was a kid, although my dad did everything possible to make sure I didn't feel rejected. He told me that some people just don't know what they have until they lose it, and that Jennifer was one of those people, but that it had nothing to do with me, that I was perfect just as I was. What really pissed me off, and my blood still boils when I think about it, was when I was like 10 years old. My school organized an event for Father's Day. You know, one of those corny things where the dads go to school and do activities with their kids. My dad had requested the day off weeks in advance because he knew how important it was to me. The day of the event came and we were in the middle of an activity when out of nowhere Paul showed up. He just appeared there, without anyone inviting him, without telling my dad, without asking me if I wanted him there. He approached us all smiling like it was the most normal thing in the world and said to my dad something like, "Hey, Robert, I thought I could come support Casey too. You know, the more support the better, right?" My dad was confused. But being him, being the kind guy he always was, he didn't want to make a scene. But me, I was furious. I was 10 years old and I already knew Paul had no right to be there. This guy I'd seen maybe 5 times in my life, who was married to the woman who had abandoned me, thought he could just show up and play dad? I told him to leave. Literally like that. I said, "Paul, I didn't invite you. I don't want you here. Go away." My teacher heard and got all uncomfortable. But my dad backed me up. He told Paul that he appreciated the gesture, but this was our moment, and that maybe it was better if he left. Paul left, but you could tell he was offended, like acting as if I was an ungrateful kid who didn't appreciate his efforts to be part of my life. Life continued like that for a few more years. Jennifer and Paul had their perfect family. I had my dad. And basically, we existed in parallel universes that rarely crossed. I was fine with that. Honestly, I didn't need them. I had everything I needed with my dad. We went fishing on weekends. He taught me to drive in his work parking lot. He helped me with science projects. I always left until the last minute. He gave me terrible advice about boys that made me laugh. He was my best friend, you know? My favorite person in the world. And then everything collapsed when I was 14 years old. My dad died of a completely unexpected heart attack. He was 47 years old, relatively healthy, or so we thought. And one day, he just collapsed at work. By the time the ambulance arrived, it was too late. I got the news at school. They pulled me out of class and took me to the hospital, but he was already dead. I didn't have a chance to say goodbye. I couldn't tell him one last time that I loved him. Nothing. One day, my dad was alive, and the next, he was gone forever. The funeral was a nightmare. As you can imagine, I was devastated. Literally couldn't even process what had happened. My uncles, Luke and Nick, my dad's brothers, were there helping me with everything because I was a minor, and someone had to take care of the legal arrangements and all that. Jennifer showed up with Paul and their 3 kids, and I have to admit that part of me hoped that maybe, just maybe, this event would wake her up and she'd realize that now I needed her, that she should be there for me because I'd just lost the only parent I knew. But no, of course not. Jennifer was at the funeral for like half an hour. Didn't hug me, didn't console me, basically gave me her condolences like she was a casual acquaintance and not my biological mother. Paul, on the other hand, was trying to act like the hero of the situation. After the service, he approached me with this fake, concerned face and told me he'd talked with Jennifer and they wanted me to come live with them, that I shouldn't be alone in this difficult time, that they could give me a stable home with my siblings, referring to the kids he had with Jennifer, who I barely knew. I looked at him like he'd grown 2 heads. Did he really think I was going to go live with them? With the woman who had abandoned me and the guy who had tried to replace my dad at Father's Day when I was 10 years old? I told him no, thanks but no. My uncles Luke and Nick had already offered to let me stay with them and I'd accepted. Paul insisted. Said that Luke and Nick were single. They're a couple. But at that time they weren't married yet. And that they didn't have experience raising kids. That a girl my age needed a mother figure. All that bullshit. I told him. And I remember this perfectly because it was probably the hardest thing I'd said in my life up to that point. I said, "You're not my father. Jennifer isn't my mother in any sense that matters, and I'd rather live under a bridge than with you guys." My uncles backed me up completely. They took care of all the legal stuff, became my guardians, and I moved in with them. Luke and Nick were, and still are, incredible. They gave me space to process my grief, supported me in everything, helped me finish high school and then college. They never tried to replace my dad, but they made me feel loved and safe, which was exactly what I needed. During all those years, Paul tried to contact me like 5 or 6 times. He sent me messages on social media, tried to get my phone number through distant relatives, even sent me a letter when I turned 18 saying he wanted to rebuild our relationship. What relationship? We didn't have any relationship. I blocked him everywhere, told my uncles not to give him my information, basically did everything possible to make it clear that I didn't want to know anything about him or Jennifer. Fast forward to like a month ago. I'm 27 years old. I live in my own apartment. I have a good job in marketing, and I'm engaged to Owen, who's basically the best person in the world and completely understands me. We've been together 5 years and got engaged 6 months ago. We were in the process of planning the wedding, looking for venues, making guest lists, all that. The problem started at a distant cousin's birthday party. I don't go to many family events on Jennifer's side because obviously, but this specific cousin, let's call her Sarah, was always nice to me when we were kids and had personally invited me, so I decided to go. Owen came with me because he knew it was going to be awkward and wanted to give me moral support. When we arrived, Jennifer was there with Paul and their 3 kids, who are now teenagers and young adults. We greeted each other very briefly, like, "Hi, how are you?" And that was it. I spent most of the party talking to other cousins and avoiding that part of the table. Everything was going relatively well until Paul approached me. He was a bit drunk, you could tell, and he had that smile that according to him was friendly, but that gave me chills. He said, "Hey, Casey, I heard you're getting married. Congratulations. That's amazing." I thanked him, trying to be polite and hoping he'd leave. But no, he kept talking. He asked me about the wedding, about the plans, about Owen, and I answered with short responses because I didn't want to have a real conversation with him. And then he dropped the bomb. He told me, "You know, Casey, I've been thinking a lot about everything that happened between us, and I know things haven't been easy. But now that you're getting married, I'd like you to consider letting me walk you down the aisle. It would be an honor for me, and I think it would be a good way to start over. To leave everything behind and be a real family." I was in literal shock for a few seconds. Owen, who was next to me, also had his mouth open. I couldn't believe what I'd just heard. This guy, who had appeared in my life when I was 6 years old, who'd seen me maybe 20 times total, who hadn't been there for anything important in my life, thought he had the right to walk me down the aisle at my wedding, thought that was going to fix everything and turn us into family? I told him no, obviously, but it wasn't enough for him. He started insisting, saying that Jennifer really wanted me to include them more in my life, that their kids, my supposed siblings, wanted to get to know me better, that it was time to get over the past and think about the future. Every word that came out of his mouth made me angrier. I tried to stay calm because we were in public and I didn't want to ruin Sarah's party, so I told him very clearly, "Paul, I appreciate that you came to talk to me, but I'm not going to change my mind. The person who's going to walk me down the aisle is my Uncle Luke. He raised me after my dad died, and he's the one who deserves that honor. I hope you understand." I thought that would be enough, but I was completely wrong. Paul got all defensive and started talking louder, saying that Luke wasn't my real father, that Jennifer was my mother, and by association he was a father figure in my life, that I was being immature and resentful for not giving them a chance. People around us started noticing something was happening, and Sarah came over asking if everything was okay. That's when I lost my composure. I didn't care anymore about ruining the party or making a scene. I was fed up. I told him. And I said this loud enough for several people to hear. "Paul, you're not a father figure in my life. You're not even part of my life. You're the husband of the woman who abandoned me when I was a baby and who chose to be a mother to 3 other kids but not to me. You have no rights over me and you never will. So please leave me alone once and for all." Paul turned red. I don't know if from embarrassment or anger. Probably both. Jennifer, who had heard the end of my speech from her table, got up and came toward us. She looked at me with this face of total indignation and told me I was being dramatic and disrespectful, that Paul was just trying to be kind, that I needed to grow up and stop living in the past. I told her, "Jennifer, you have no right to tell me anything about maturity or about the past. You abandoned me, period. There's nothing else to discuss. I didn't ask you to be in my life now, and I don't want you at my wedding." We left the party immediately after. Owen was proud of me for defending my boundaries, but I was shaking from the adrenaline and rage. Sarah sent me a message afterwards, apologizing for what had happened and telling me she didn't know Paul was going to do that she was so sorry. I told her not to worry, that it wasn't her fault. I thought that was the end of it. But no, obviously not. 2 days later, Jennifer called me, and I made the mistake of answering. She literally yelled at me for 10 minutes, saying I had humiliated her in front of the whole family, that Paul was hurt, that I was ungrateful, that after everything they had tried to do for me, I repaid them like this. I asked her, "What exactly have you tried to do for me? Abandon me? Go to jail for not paying child support? Show up at my dad's funeral to offer a home I didn't want? Harass me for years after I made it clear I didn't want contact?" She didn't answer anything coherent, just kept yelling that I owed her respect because she was my mother. I told her, "You stopped being my mother the day you decided to leave when I was 6 months old. Being a mother isn't just giving birth. It's being there, raising, caring, loving, and you didn't do any of that with me. So no, I don't owe you anything." And I hung up. I blocked her immediately after because I knew she was going to keep calling. I thought that was it, that it had finally ended. But 2 weeks ago, Paul showed up at my apartment. I don't know how he got my address, probably asked some relative. But there he was, knocking on my door on a Saturday morning. I opened thinking it was the delivery I was expecting, and it was him. My stomach sank. He told me we needed to talk, that this had gone too far, that Jennifer was very upset, and that I needed to apologize to her. I told him I had nothing to apologize for, and that he needed to leave. He tried to put his foot in the door, like literally tried to prevent me from closing it, and told me he wasn't leaving until I heard what he had to say. I yelled at him to leave or I was going to call the police. And Owen came out of the bedroom hearing the commotion. Paul saw Owen and changed tactics, tried to appeal to him, saying, surely Owen could make me see reason, that family was important, that I shouldn't get married with so much resentment in my heart. Owen looked at him and told him very calmly, Casey has told you to leave. Respect that or I'll call the police myself. Finally, Paul left. But not without saying that Jennifer and he weren't going to give up. That someday I was going to grow up and realize the mistake I was making. I closed the door in his face, locked it, and stood there shaking. Owen hugged me and told me I'd done the right thing, that they had no right to force themselves into my life. Since then, I have them both blocked on everything. I told my uncles and all the family who had contact with them not to give them any information about me, and I asked Sarah to please not invite me to events where they're going to be. Sarah understood completely and has been super understanding. The wedding is in 5 months and my Uncle Luke is going to walk me down the aisle, as was always the plan. Nick is going to be my man of honor because basically they're my 2 dads now, and Owen has his family who are wonderful and welcoming and who treat me like I've always been part of it. There's no room in my life for people who only show up when it's convenient for them or when they want to feel good about themselves. Last week I was with Owen organizing the final details, and he asked me if I'd ever regretted how I handled the situation with Paul and Jennifer. I told him no, not for a second. Because the truth is that family isn't who shares your blood. Family is who was there when you needed them most, who picked you up when you fell, who loved you unconditionally. My dad was my family. Luke and Nick are my family. Owen is my family. Jennifer and Paul are just strangers who share some genes with me, and that doesn't give them any rights over my life or my happiness.